All right. I am so excited to welcome Trish to the podcast. Trish, thank you so much for being here. I am really excited to talk to you today about co-housing.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks so much, Katie.
Of course. So, in this season, we have a whole variety of guest speakers talking about eco minded parenting and caretaking. And your perspective that you bring to the table is so unique. It's something that I, at least in my own circles, haven't heard a lot of people talking about. And
Mhm.
so, you are the executive director of the Cohousing Association of the United States, which is huge. And the whole idea of co-housing communities has been very new to me, and so I'm excited to get this information out there. But before we even dive in, I would love if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the beloved people in your life and what you're passionate about.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Trish Becker. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm the executive director of the Cohousing Association of the US. My background is in social work. And so I feel like that actually is a really important piece because I view the world through a social work lens, the systems that we all operate within. So that kind of infuses my passion for community, and I think is a really important part of my journey. Um, let's see. I'm a mom, so I'm a mother to 5-year-old Cadence who just lost her first tooth a couple of days ago. So it feels
Oh.
like she's growing up. Well, she lost her first and her second tooth. Her second one, she did the whole Nerf gun, tie a piece of
Oh
floss,
no.
and like yank it out herself. So it's been an exciting week. So I I love being a mom, and I feel like that's probably my primary role. And beyond that, I am passionate about really all things human connection. So I love facilitating groups, and I do that professionally and work as a coach as well. I love designing gatherings that bring people together around a shared purpose, and then really any way that I can foster community, whether it's helping co-housing communities get off the ground or thrive, or helping people think through how they can build a stronger sense of community in their traditional neighborhoods. That is all the
Mhm.
stuff that makes me feel really alive, just helping people to feel more connected in their own lives. So,
Oh, I love that so much. I wonder, this is such a tangent, but,
yeah.
and I think listeners are probably, if they've been listening for a while, they might laugh because I somehow find a way to weave this into so many conversations. But have you heard of the Enneagram?
Yes, I'm a
Yes. Okay.
nine with a little
Okay.
seven, a lot of seven.
I was wondering because I love that tool so much. It has been, I mean, there's a lot of personality sort of assessors and everything out there, but the Enneagram itself it's such it's an ancient tool, first of all.
Yeah.
And it's also the one that I've found to be the most dead accurate every single time. But it's
Hmm.
always interesting talking to people and hearing what they're passionate about. And then my mind is like, oh, I wonder what
Yeah,
Enneagram type they are.
totally. What type are you?
I'm a two.
Okay. Yep.
And I've heard twos and nines actually get mixed up a lot,
Hmm. Yeah.
because both typically love to help people and to be around people, and
Yeah.
relationships are like everything. So, but
Yeah.
then there's a lot of distinctive differences between the two as well.
Yeah, I love that you weave that in, because that's something I get teased for too, is everything comes back to the Enneagram. They're like, all right, Trish, this is not just because you're a nine. In my personal
I
relationships, I didn't do the dishes because I'm a nine.
I love that so much. I might even just throw a link to the Enneagram Institute in the show notes
Yeah.
so anyone who wants to know more. Oh my gosh, but that was such a tangent. Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm always happy to go into Enneagram territory.
I love that. I am so excited to hear more about co-housing in general. Like I said before, this is a very new subject to me, and but really the more I've heard about it and the more I've learned from you, and I watched your TEDx talk, and I'll also have that linked in the show notes. But to me it's like this is so new, but it just makes perfect sense. It
Hmm.
feels like this is the way that not only do cultures around the world still live this way, like they have
Hmm.
continuously been living this way. But it's also the way that, we all used to live, and
Hmm.
our modern Western society has typically gotten away from that. So,
Hmm.
um, kind of with sustainable practices, I found that a lot of it is really just going back to what we used to do, or
Totally.
going toward things that other cultures around the world are still doing. And it's
Hmm.
just inherently better for the earth and better for communities. And I feel like co-housing definitely falls into that. So
Hmm.
I would love if you could just start with maybe giving us a general co-housing 101. Like,
Yeah.
what does that even mean? What does it typically look like? And, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, totally. I love what you said about going back to the way that it's been done because, co-housing as a very specific model, which I'll define, started between 30 and 40 years ago with these two architects that traveled to Denmark and then brought the model here. And living in support of one another is something that has always been done and really
Mhm.
has been this like way of life has really been intentionally dissolved by capitalism and the patriarchy and white supremacy, right? And it is just a natural way of living. And so
Yeah.
that really is the spirit of co-housing. So co-housing is just it's an intentionally designed neighborhood. So if you were to look at one, it would look like a little village typically. So the design pushes cars to the periphery and then so that the design can facilitate more interaction. So if you looked at
Mm,
it, you would see like parking lots on the outside instead of garages in front of the house. You
mm,
would see lots of green space and walking paths connecting front porches, really to like foster those organic interactions between
mm,
one another. So that's what it would look like. Um, it is in co-housing, there are private homes. So they can either be single family homes, townhomes, condos, but it's a private home. It's a regular sized home. You have your own kitchen, bathrooms. Traditionally, they might be smaller, slightly smaller than your average square footage. And that's because, in addition to your private home, you have a lot of common space.
mm,
So, most co-housing communities have a common house or a large common room where it's a gathering space. There's often industrial kitchens, dining rooms where people can gather. There's almost always a guest room or a guest suite so that individual homes don't have to have that room sitting empty. And
mhm,
instead, everyone can kind of share the guest suite when people are in town, they can check it out.
mm,
Um, and then a lot of that like large storage is shared as well. So like a bike storage area, shared garages, just one lawnmower, power tool, giant walk, that kind of thing, so that each individual doesn't need so much space for themselves. They can share instead. And so I usually describe co-housing as shared time, shared space, and shared commitment. So shared time comes from this. Co-housing communities usually have regular gatherings, so regular community meetings for the residents to make decisions about what affects the community. And then shared meals, we call that the secret sauce of community. So most communities have sort of a rotating meal plan where you take turns on a cooking team. So, for example, in ARIA Co-housing, which is the community that I was a founding member of, I sat on a cooking team. So I actually cooked once every 2 to 3 months, but every Sunday we had a meal that I just got to show up to. And as a
mm.
mom of a very young child, that was everything to me. And
Yeah.
so we call it the secret sauce because that's the time where people gather and they get to know each
Mhm,
other and they have these organic interactions over shared meals. So communities, some have shared meals every night, some have a couple nights a week, some do it less frequently. Every community is different, but shared meals are generally a part of co-housing. And then the other piece of shared time is like the birthday parties and the baby showers and the happy hours and just all of the fun part of community. So that's a critical part of co-housing. And then shared space is what I mentioned. You have your individual homes, but then um, common spaces that could be community gardens, it could be courtyards, libraries. Some co-housing communities have hot tubs, patios, just these like really beautiful spaces that are designed for people to gather. And then the third piece, arguably the most important, is the shared commitment. So
Mhm.
a lot of people ask, well, what makes this different than just a neighborhood with an HOA and a clubhouse? And it's
Right.
really that intention. So people who join co-housing communities are entering it knowing that they are going to be expected to know their neighbors. They're going to be expected to give some of their time and labor towards the betterment of the community, and that they're really going to be there for each other. They're going to be involved in these mutually supportive relationships that when, my neighbor needs a ride to the airport and I'm free, I'm going to be happy to do that.
Mhm.
And it's a joy because they, brought me dinner last night when I didn't have time to cook after work. So it's just sort of that like intention to be
Mhm.
in a deeper level of neighborly relationship with one another. So
Mhm.
that's a lot, but that's basically co-housing, like what it looks like and then what it feels like when you're there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad
Yeah.
you expanded on each of those pieces and especially the intentionality because like you were
Hmm.
describing the way it looks, I was thinking about, like even townhomes and places that are, they're kind of parallel to each other and they're facing each other, parking is on the sidelines. I'm like, well, this
Hmm.
seems like a very similar community. It's very tightly knit. But then
Yeah.
like you said, the intentionality, like you could easily live anywhere and not get to know your neighbors at all, like
Right.
if you wanted
Right.
to. and
Yeah.
and so this is very different, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, if you could share maybe some of the common myths that you've run into or just
Yeah.
misconceptions about co-housing and clarify them, because the first one that comes to my mind that I'm sure, maybe is not the case for everybody is like, okay, I think this sounds amazing as a mostly extroverted person,
Hmm.
type 2 Enneagram, but I think this sounds like an introvert's nightmare. So is that like
Yep.
what are your thoughts on that and also any other,
Hmm.
common myths or misconceptions?
Yeah, I'm glad you started with that one. That was the first thing that came to mind when you said what are common myths. Everyone thinks that it's for extroverts.
Yeah.
So many conversations that I have involve someone saying, "Oh, I would love this, but my partner is an introvert and they would just hate it."
Mhm.
And actually, we've researched this, and there are more introverts in co-housing. And I myself am an introvert as well. And so I can speak to kind of why I think co-housing is actually great for introverts. And that is because, well, a few reasons. I think that it provides sort of a structure to engagement that I can choose to opt into or out of. So the one important piece to remember about co-housing is you have your private home. You're not sharing a kitchen. If you want to, you don't have to think about running into your neighbors when you wake up and want to stumble into your kitchen for a cup of coffee and you don't want to
Mhm.
interact at that point. That's not happening. You have your private home, but you also know that if you're feeling social, you can probably walk out to the patio and find someone there who knows you, who knows your story, and who you can engage with in a real way. And you don't have to do the exhausting small talk like you do
Oh,
with
I
a
like that.
stranger. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
someone who says, "Oh, how was that presentation that you had the other day?" Or, "Hey, did you get that recipe that I dropped on your doorstep last night?" So it's this like beautiful, deeper level of interaction that you can choose to engage with or not.
Mhm.
And I also think co-housers have gotten really good as a result of living together at just communicating their needs and their boundaries. So, one example is my daughter was born while we were living in co-housing. She was the first baby born in the community. So
Aw.
everyone was so excited to come meet her. And I'm an introvert. So we know that in times of like stress or transition, we actually become more of that, right? So as I was like coming home from the hospital, I was really worried. I was thinking,
Mhm.
I need some time to myself. I cannot have neighbor like a parade of neighbors at all hours coming to see the baby. I need to sleep when I can.
Mhm.
So my daughter's name is Cadence, and we put a sign on the door that said Cadence's office hours. Please come by on like Tuesday and Thursday from 2 to 4. And everyone respected it, and they came by at those
Wow.
times and held the baby. And so it was just this like um ability to define my boundary for social interaction and know that it was completely respected. It wasn't taken as rude. It was just like a loving gesture and way to define that relationship. So that is one myth. Another common myth is that we're a cult or a commune. That comes up a lot, right? When you're like, oh yeah, we live kind of together. And so people have all of these images of what we are that is in fact not the case. So a little bit of vocabulary. Intentional community is like an umbrella term that we use to define everything from commune, like where everyone shares, pools their resources, and shares everything. Commune's on one end of the spectrum. Co-housing is actually on the other end of the spectrum, but still under the intentional community umbrella.
Mhm.
And so there's typically not sharing of financial resources in co-housing. You privately own your home. It's actually the governance structure of co-housing is usually just a traditional HOA. So you pay into an HOA that maintains the community. And then that's each community kind of defines how they make decisions together. But it's a non-hierarchical decision-making process. So every person has a voice in community. If there were a leader of a community, that's what would make it a cult, right? So there are
Mhm.
no leaders of co-housing communities. It's a totally flat structure where every voice matters, and of course you can come and go, you can leave as you please. So that's just something that comes up a lot. I just think anytime that you talk about something alternative to the mainstream, it's likely to be stigmatized. So it's very common that I spend time explaining that co-housing is not any of these things, that actually it's not weird at all, that it's a
Mhm.
very normal thing to want to just know the people that live next to you and have them looking out for you and want to share some time together. So those I think are two of the most common myths that I spend my time debunking.
Yeah. No, I'm
Yeah.
so glad you brought that one up because I was thinking it too, but I was like, I don't know if
Yep.
I want to say this one.
Totally. Yeah. No, it happens all the time. People say, "Oh, that sounds a little culty," or just, is that the same thing as a commune? That's a genuine question,
Mhm.
and it's not. So,
Yeah. That's
yeah.
so interesting. And I mean, there's that phrase that it takes a village to raise a child, and
Hmm.
like, and for so many people who live with, multi-generational homes or
Hmm.
they just have family nearby or they have friends that are like family, it's similar in the sense that like we have our chosen communities that we want
Yeah.
around us all the time. And this just happens to be like an entire neighborhood that has
Right.
opted into choosing to live with each other
Hmm.
on a closer basis than just like, yeah, so and so's my neighbor. I don't really know
Right.
anything about them.
Yeah, totally. I think that that's another myth too. People often say, like, well, so are you all best friends? Like, are you all really close? And no, it's a community of an average of 30 some people. Communities vary in size, but let's say, an average of 30 to 50 people. Um, and within that group, there are people that I feel really close with, that I hang out with all the time outside of community meetings. There are the people that I see at community dinners, but don't spend time with outside. And then there are people who our personalities don't work and we have conflict, we have disagreements. But the difference is that I am so much more willing to engage in dialogue or conflict with that person because we have this shared commitment to one another,
Mm.
because we're going to see each other, because that person took my trash out when I broke my ankle. So we have that baseline of just like love and concern for one another, that we can withstand conflict better than what you see in traditional neighborhoods, or if you go on like a next door app and it's just this, like ability to shut off and to just say,
Mhm.
you made me mad, I'm angry, and I'm just not going to engage in any further dialogue. So that's
Yeah.
what you get in like a traditional neighborhood setting. So you get kind of the spectrum of relationships, but yeah, those are common questions or, misconceptions that people have about co-housing.
Yeah. That sounds like a really good push, a really good challenge for
Mm,
the society today that I think most of us are familiar with, where like, like you said, whether it's shutting somebody off on Nextdoor or even just like Facebook interactions, general online interactions. And, in our post-COVID world, so many of us have gotten used to like opting for virtual interactions, and
mhm,
it's just easier to kind of not engage with people we don't really
totally.
wanna engage with, and there are some benefits to that, but I think it's also a good push to really work on communication, and like you said,
Totally.
when you're both signed up for, this intentional living, this community, you're committed to that, and you need to work through things, and
Yeah,
I can imagine that, raising a family within that community, that's one of the really great traits being modeled
yeah,
for kids is this communication piece.
yep.
I'm curious if you are seeing a lot of young families in co-housing communities in, the your research and experience, or what's the typical demographic look like?
Yeah. So typically co-housing, it does skew older. So there's, a decent chunk of retired folks or just older people with kids who have moved out. And this is something that I'm really working on changing because as a mom, I experienced firsthand the benefits of bringing a child into the world with a supportive community, and I can't imagine doing it another way.
Mhm.
And like you mentioned earlier, most people don't know about co-housing. And then when you look at the younger generations, very few people know about it. And so if
Yeah.
I could wave a magic wand, I would just have co-housing be a household term so that when young people are deciding on the path for their life, they're looking at their options. Co-housing is just something that comes to mind when they think, okay, I want to start a family in a few years. Do I want to move to a big house in the suburbs, or is co-housing a good option for me? So that's something that I'm working really hard to build awareness among the young generation because contrary to what you actually see as the demographics in co-housing, which is more older, single, not necessarily single, but people without kids, co-housing is made for families. I mean, many times they're designed with playgrounds and acres of forest and really just the freedom for kids to roam around a neighborhood and go from house to house, and that every person in that whole neighborhood knows your kid and is looking out for them. It is just a utopia for
Mhm.
kids. So the more that I can help spread awareness about that for young families, the better. It really is exactly what you said. It's the village that we all know that we need, but many
Mhm.
people just don't know that it exists or how to access it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love where I live right now, and we bought the home with the intention to, raise our kid that we have now, and if we have any more,
Yeah.
this will be it for us. So I'm very happy, but I didn't know about this as an option. I feel like, oh man, if I had known, I would have looked
Mhm,
into the idea of co-housing a lot more, before making this commitment. But one thing that comes to mind for younger families as you're trying to or even just younger generations, even if they don't have kids yet, if they're trying to figure out, like you said, what's their long-term plan, where do they want to end up in life,
mhm,
um one thing that comes to mind is just so many people that I know of right now are really struggling to even buy their own home. Like
mhm.
the economy, the times that we live in is really, really rough right now. So I'm curious what that looks like with co-housing. Do you have to buy your own home? Like you said, it's private owned. Is there an option to rent, or is there some sort of like affordable housing option within co-housing communities? What's the accessibility?
Yeah, totally. So this, I would say affordability is the greatest challenge in our movement. It's like the most necessary thing for us to address. And I think that there are many strategies that can intersect with co-housing in order to make it more affordable. So co-housing in itself is not an affordability model. It's an architectural model. It's a social model. But you can intersect it with different approaches to make it more affordable. So a few examples, developers can actually incorporate affordable units into the community. That's something that's done, not on the individual level, but on the developer level. But at ARIA here on the northwest side of Denver, we had a third of our units were designated affordable units. Communities can also, typically a co-housing community will write its own policies around rental. So whether or not, units can be rented and for how long. And I think that rental and rent to own options are great strategies to increase affordability and access, and especially to get those younger families in. If a group is forming a community, they can partner with what's called a community land trust, which is where a nonprofit owns the land, basically, which essentially takes the land is usually about a third of the cost of property. So if a nonprofit owns the land and you build on top of it, that reduces the home prices. That's a really simplified version of that. And also, there's a model, a financial and governing model called a cooperative. So if you hear like housing co-op, you can have a co-housing community that's also a co-op. And what that does is it's actually a cooperative that owns the house or the community. And then people who live there are shareholders and they get like a room or a house with their share. It makes it so that you don't have to bring the full down payment when you buy in. You buy in for a lower amount, and then it caps inflation to keep it affordable for the time being. Again, those are really simple explanations of very complicated strategies, but those are some of the ways that people are looking at this. And the other piece that I'll add is that when I think about the future of co-housing and I think about it becoming more diverse, more affordable, more accessible, I think about the areas that we can push at the boundaries of co-housing as we know it to like decide, okay, what is the core good stuff of co-housing? What makes it work? Take that as a sauce and apply it on a traditional neighborhood. So there are examples of this all over the country where people are, buying homes in a traditional neighborhood or forming relationships with their neighbors, pulling up the fences, starting having a rotating meal plan, say, oh, we have weekly potlucks and it, rotates at each neighbor's house, or having childcare exchanges, using one neighbor's garage to store the power tools, that the whole community shares. All of these sorts of things I think are in line with the ethos of co-housing, but look a little different and make it more accessible to people who can't afford to buy into co-housing.
I was just thinking before you started saying that, I was like, well, first of all, thank you for sharing all of, the summaries of how this could be expanded and more accessible in the future of co-housing. But I was thinking, I was like, there's so many benefits to living in this sort of intentional community that gives you a cost savings, as a homeowner or as a family, there's
Totally.
so much that just naturally comes with this community that I think definitely needs to be factored in when people are kind of weighing the pros and cons of like whether or not they want to choose this for their lifestyle. And what I love about sustainable living is usually that's going to be good for the planet and for your wallet. So maybe you could expand a little bit on that. Like you shared about sharing tools, for example. That's huge. My husband works in construction and I know like power tools are so ridiculously expensive. So I know right there that is a huge cost saver for, having basically a library of tools in your neighborhood that you can just check out and share with each other. But what are some of the other maybe like cost saving and eco-friendly practices within typical housing communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, yeah, there's a saying in co-housing, people wear all these buttons that say, do we all need our own lawnmower? And it's just this idea, which you just have to laugh at when you think about a traditional neighborhood. Everyone has these lawns. they mow the lawn for like 30 minutes to an hour once a week and then put it in the garage. Like, why do we all have our own lawnmower
Yep.
and everything else? Like, fill in the blank, right? And then not only do we each have our own of all these different things, but then we have these spaces where we're like, oh, well, I need a garage or I need a basement or I need an extra bedroom, two extra bedrooms to keep all my stuff, right? It's just like, it doesn't make sense for the planet. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense for our wallet that we're all just consuming all these different things instead of just pooling our resources and sharing in creative ways. And co-housing has gotten really good at that. There's even a movement within co-housing to share cars. So
Mm.
little groups of people have said, you know what, I don't drive that much. You know, we're walking distance to town or I ride my bike or whatever. Let's just share a car. And so that's something that people are talking about. Um, and then, you know, you're going to see a lot of practices like bulk purchasing. So a Costco
Mm.
membership for the community. And,
Yep.
you know, there's so many things that you can buy in bulk, save money, save the planet. Um, in terms of sustainability, you will not find a co-housing community without EV chargers, community gardens, probably solar panels. They're really leading the way on sustainability because it's such a deeply held value. So you're going to see native landscaping and sharing of food from the garden with members of the community and with the wider neighborhood. So a
Mhm.
lot of communities have like production gardens where they basically give away the food to local groups or have,
Wow.
you know, food distribution. You're going to see composting practices and green building strategies and all of that. And I think that the important piece with all of this, in terms of sustainability and just like personal well being, financial and otherwise, I think that connection is the foundation of a good life. And I think that when
Mhm.
you are experiencing a life of deep connection and deep meaning, that you gain from living in community, you are less called to consume,
Mhm.
to go on Amazon and buy the stuff, and you are called less to waste. So I think that experiencing that life of connection creates sustainability for the planet and for our own well-being. We're better people when we have the support of a community and when we feel a sense of belonging. So I feel like that's
Mhm.
the foundation of all these other like strategies and practices that we talk about.
Mhm. Oh, that sounds like an absolute dream. I'm like listening to all of this. I'm like, okay, so it's too late for me. I can't get into a co-housing community at this stage of life, but I'm already thinking like, how can I reach out to my own neighbors and try to like
Yeah.
naturally build something similar and see if anybody
Hmm.
might be on board. I think one thing I've run into a lot when talking with people about sharing possessions, I think the way you described it was so perfect that it just really doesn't make sense when you think about it. Like, we each have our own of these subsets of things, and we each have to have a place to store the things.
Right.
It doesn't really make a lot of financial or, environmental sense. But I talk to people who are like, this is hard for me to share because this is
Hmm.
a possession that was either really expensive or it's
Hmm.
very valuable to me. It means a lot. They want it to be well taken care of. And I totally hear that. There are people who you wouldn't want to share those things with because they're not going to be responsible. But I think that's part of this intentionality with the community of co-housing that you're talking about is that, you know, that's very different. If everyone is sharing these tools, if everybody is sharing a car or a lawnmower, they're going to take good care of it as best they can
Hmm.
because everybody has to use it, including like that person. So when they're
Yeah.
using it, they're going to take good care of it. So it makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, I can totally see how you could be in a traditional neighborhood and think, well, gosh, that would be great, but I don't really know my neighbors. I don't know if they would mess it up or even be into this. Excuse me. So I think that the relationship piece is key. Like
Mhm.
any way that we can get to know our neighbors is going to build the foundation for these other things to spring forth. So if you're gathering regularly with your neighbors, let's say you have a rotating potluck in a traditional neighborhood, you're getting to know one another, you're getting to trust one another, and then opportunities are emerging. So we lived in Aria co-housing for several years. Then we moved to a nearby property where we're forming a new but slightly different community. But right now, it's part of a single family neighborhood. So it feels like we're operating with co housing values within a traditional neighborhood. So, one great example, we actually have weekly meals together as a community. We just rotate different houses. And because we all know each other so well, just recently someone said, "Gosh, I need a power washer. Like we need for whatever reason that we need power washers." And several other people said, "Oh, we totally do too. Can we just go in on that together?" Like no one cherishes a power washer. No,
Yeah.
so there was that relationship of trust and then this opportunity emerged. So I always tell people when you're thinking about how to form deeper connections in a traditional community, think about what you have an abundance of and then create connection around that. So one example is we have a lot of garage space. So we have our neighbor, the arborist, stores his equipment here. Our neighbor who builds cars has his trailer here. Someone stores an extra car here. We have tons of people's stuff, and then we're kind of the house for the like shared tools and things. We have an abundance of garages. That's what we can offer, and we have built connection as a result. So that's kind of a frame that you can think of how you can um, feel like you're in co-housing when you're in a traditional neighborhood.
Mm. I love that so much. I really hope that, the awareness of this just continues to spread. I know that you're working so hard to make sure that that is just like this education and awareness is getting out there. And like you said, specifically, trying to talk with and reach younger generations and young families because there are just so many benefits to this way of living. It definitely excites me hearing about it. I wonder if, as we start to bring it in for a landing, if we could go back to that idea of raising a family and the most meaningful impacts that
Hmm.
a co-housing community could have on a family, like
Yeah,
within your own personal experience as a mama and research that you've done. What do you feel like would be some of the top benefits for, young kids being brought up in this whole community?
totally. I think about the impacts on our family as like the impacts on me as an individual, as a mom, the impacts on my partnership, and then the impacts on my child. So, we, with the support of a community, bringing a child into a community allowed me to be a better version of myself. It allowed me to engage in things that make me in my passions, in my work, and because I had childcare, I had just the regular meals to come back to, and then just a lot of this invisible support that just empowered me to be me, and it gave me the space to kind of pursue all of those things that make me a whole person, which then in turn make me a better mom, right? When I'm not stretched so thin. Then when I'm with my child, she gets the best side of me because I feel supported.
Mhm.
So one example of that that I talk about in my TED Talk is my daughter she had RSV when she was 3 months old, and so it was life threatening. And we were in
Yeah.
at Children's Hospital for over a week, and we
Wow.
came back to our co-housing community. We'd been gone for a week, so it was just our kitchen. All the food was rotting or gone. It was the plants would be dead. We just like came back totally shell shocked from this time in the hospital, and we walk into our home expecting it to just be, a complete mess of rotting food and dead plants and all of that. And we walked in and we opened the refrigerator, and someone had filled it with fresh
Mm.
groceries, knowing that we were getting back then. Didn't ask. They just like
Wow.
found I still don't know who did it. And so it's that sort of like love, right? We
Yeah.
felt so loved to come home to that. And we just felt like the community has our back, so we can be these whole people. Um, and as partners too, I'm so much more able to engage in a strong relationship with my partner because we have that support, because we can say, hey, we got concert tickets tonight and I want to go on a date night with my partner. And so I knock on my neighbor's door and say, can you come over? We're going to put kids to bed and then we're going to go out. Can you just hang out in the living room? And they're excited to be a part of that. So it like brings this new life to our relationship too,
Yeah.
in a time when we suffer, right? Traditionally, relationships suffer, and it's hard. It's hard to be a new
Yeah.
parent, and it's hard to find time for yourselves. And then, most importantly, I mean, Cadence is a classic child raised in community. She does not know a stranger. She's completely confident around other adults. And she has learned as a result of living in community that the world is a safe place, that
Mm.
it's filled with beautiful people who are interesting and represent all different kinds of humanness. She has all these people to go to that are not just her parents, to talk
Mm.
about something she's excited about or to process a problem with. Like the fact that she has other adults to connect with outside of her parents is really beautiful. And then kids too, just the idea of like kids running from door to door and going to this house because Deborah made cookies and then going over to this house because they have the really cool game and all that. That's just idyllic. That's what we all want for our kids. And that is very much alive in co-housing. So those are some of the many, many ways that I think that co-housing has impacted myself and my family.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy that there are so many families who are,
Yeah.
they have kids growing up with this, and all of the benefits that you just described are highly impactful and will carry them through into adulthood. Like, I can't wait to see how they view the world and what they do in the world when they grow up.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I actually spoke with some kids, some adults who grew up in co-housing as kids, just this last week, and they were just sharing um how they went to college, and they just described having this feeling of like comfort with themselves because
Mm.
they grew up like going to a meal with a room full of what would be strangers who all care about them. And so they carry that with them. They're confident human beings. They feel well rounded and safe and comfortable in their own skin, which I think is just a really beautiful impact.
What a gift that is. That's so
Yeah,
amazing.
I know.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I think there's probably a lot of listeners on the call who are, really curious to learn more about this and maybe even to see how they could get into a community like this. So I wonder, as we wrap up, if you could just share like 1 to 3 actionable steps that our listeners could take, um, taking into consideration where all they might be coming from and their level of accessibility and all of that. If they want to learn more about co-housing and within Denver, that's where we are, but also just across the states, what could they do?
Totally. The Cohousing Association hosts a gathering called the Commons. It's on the 10th of every month at 10 a.m. Mountain. It's just a free, come whenever you want space. We talk about what co-housing is, even more in depth. We talk about, what it's like and common lingo and what you would do if you wanted to join or start a community, and then lots of time just to connect with fellow dreamers. So we'll post the link to that, but it's the 10th of every month at 10 a.m. Mountain, the Commons. That is a great place to start or continue your journey into co-housing. And you can also we have tons of events and virtual trainings on our website. So that's cohousing.org. And then also, we're hosting our national co-housing conference. It happens every 2 years. So it will be next summer in Denver, August of 2024. So stay tuned for that. But that's an exciting opportunity to engage in person. The other thing that I would recommend is to visit a local community. So whether you're in Denver or somewhere else, you can go to our website, cohousing.org, and we have a directory where you can see existing communities as well as groups who are starting to gather together and don't have a community but have a dream. And I always recommend visiting communities, not necessarily because you might move in there one day. You might. I mean, if you love it and they have a home open up, you will be among the first to hear about it. But
Mhm.
really, because existing communities sort of serve as these hubs for groups who want to form their own communities. Um, so you can go to a dinner, see what it's like, tour the community, see what it, actually looks and feels like. And then you can also meet other people in your area who are interested in those kinds of things. So those are my recommendations. And then, yeah, I think a lot of people are in the situation that you shared, Katie, which is just, we have a family, we're rooted where we are for various reasons. We're not going to be moving into co-housing, but a lot of this sounds really attractive. And so I would just say you can create
Mhm.
stronger networks within traditional neighborhoods by just forming relationships with your neighbors, getting to know them, start some sort of regular gathering. We know that adult friendships are rooted in frequent and unplanned interactions. So it's your neighbors, say hello when you're out walking your dog. Go ask for a cup of sugar rather than just going to the store. Like these little sort of interactions, they weave a strong web of connection and community and civic engagement. And from that can sprout all of these other ideas that we talked about. So go get to know your neighbors, even if you live in a regular neighborhood and it's scary. It's okay.
Yeah, it might feel scary. It might take a lot of work to like
Yep,
push people out of the bubble a little bit, but
totally.
that sounds so worthwhile and meaningful. And there's so many benefits, not only to your own personal growth, but also for the planet and for your budget, like all these
Yeah,
things we highlighted today. So thank you so much for taking the time to just share all of this with us. I'm super
yeah,
excited about the entire concept of co-housing and all of the links and resources you mentioned. I will be sure to put them in the episode description, as well as ways to like follow, you on Instagram or whatever else might
yeah.
be there. So, thank you so much for your time today. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thank you so much, Katie, for having me. It was a joy. And yeah, just excited to talk about co housing and sustainable parenting. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to pause this.